So in this lesson, we are simply going to demonstrate how to use the quadratic formula in order to solve for x in quadratic equations. So let's say you're seated peacefully in the exam, minding your own business, and I decide to ask you to please solve for x in this equation. So we have 5x squared minus 7x minus 2, and everything is set equal to 0. So here we can see that we are dealing with a quadratic equation because the exponent of x is just 2. But most importantly, the coefficient of x squared is not 1. That's the most important thing. If the coefficient of x squared was 1, we were simply going to factorize this quadratic equation the normal way, all right? Now, the first thing that we need to do is to state this quadratic formula. So it says x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac. And of course, everything is divided by 2a. All right? Okay. Now the question is, what is a, b, and c? Well, this 5 that you see here is actually a, and this 7 that you see here is actually b. And of course, the 2 that you see here is just going to be c. It's a constant. Then after we state our quadratic formula, we have to substitute into this formula. So when we see b, we put 7. Then we say plus or minus. Where we see b again, we put 7. But of course, it has to be squared. And when we see a, we put a 5. And where we see c, we actually put negative 2. Well, the value of c is not really 2, but then it goes with the sign of that 2, negative 2 in this case. Then, of course, everything is divided by 2a, where a is just going to be 5. Then we want to simplify what we have inside of the root. So we still have negative 7 plus or minus. You quickly go to your calculator and say 7 squared minus 4 times 5 times negative 2. Well, you simply get 89. And of course, we understand that 89 is not a perfect square. So we just write it like that. Then, of course, 2 times 5, we get a 10. So this is what we have. Then from this point, due to this plus or minus, we understand that it's actually 2 solutions because a quadratic equation always has 2 solutions. So now it's time for us to separate the solutions. Well, the first solution is going to be negative 7 plus the square root of 89 divided by 10. Or now we go to the second solution. Well, x here is still going to be negative 7, but now we say minus the square root of 89, and everything is divided by 10. Do you see that? That is how we resolve this plus or minus. And in most cases, they like to say, round your solutions to 2 decimal places. I'm not saying always, I'm saying in most cases. So please read your instructions very carefully. So when we press this, the first part into the calculator, and we actually round this to 2 decimal places, we find that the first solution, x will actually be 0.24. Then we go to the second solution. We say, or x will actually be what? Well, rounded off to 2 decimal places once again, we find that x will just be negative 1.64. All right. Now you also need to know where are the marks, right? Yes. Well, in most cases, this quadratic formula actually takes 4 marks in most cases. Now, these 4 marks, they can divide it in one of 2 ways. Sometimes they can say, we are going to give you 2 marks for substituting into the correct formula. And then we also give you a mark for each of your solutions. All right? So in other words, in this case, there is not really a mark for simplifying your quadratic formula. So that's the first case. What about the second case, whereby it's still 4 marks? Well, they can give you 1 mark for the standard form, but now in this case, we can see that it was already given to us in standard form, so they won't give you a mark for that, right? No, only if you had to write it in standard form, as you will see in the next 2 cases. They can give you a mark for the standard form, a mark for substituting into the correct formula, and again, a mark for your solutions. But then if it is only 3 marks, they will give you a mark for substituting into the correct formula and a mark for each of your solutions. So yes, that is normally how the marks are distributed. So well, let's say they give you something like this one. They say, please solve for x in this case. You have negative 4x squared plus 3x, and then you say plus 6, and this is equal to 0. All right? Now, even though it already looks as if it's in standard form, it's not really in standard form because the coefficient of x squared is actually negative. We really hate it when the coefficient of x squared is negative. So we want to divide throughout by this negative. So negative 4x squared divided by negative 1, we get a positive 4x squared. But here we get a negative 3x, and here we get a negative 6. Now your equation is in standard form. And notice that it's not possible for you to divide throughout by 4 because now you're generating fractions. You'll be having 3 over 4 and 6 over 4. And we try by all means not to work with equations that involve fractions, all right? Then now it's time for us to state the quadratic formula. It's negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac. And of course, this entire thing is further divided by 2a. Then now it's time for us to substitute into this correct equation. And what I've realized as I was marking you is the fact that you're not really respecting mathematics. So please make sure that you respect math and write things according to how they should be written. But you don't need to stress how are they supposed to be written. Just worry about doing things as I do. So exactly as how I'm writing these things, please write them down, all right? In which case your happiness will be complete. Now here I want you to realize something. The value of b is now negative 3. And I want you to check. You have negative for the formula, and you still have to open a bracket and substitute the value of b. Just because there's a negative here doesn't mean you should ignore the negative there, all right? Okay. Then we come back and say, well, b squared minus 4a, and then we say c, like this. And this entire thing is further divided by 2a. Of course, our a is just going to be 4. So as we have seen in the first problem, the mark of simplifying this quadratic formula, or rather the step, is not really given a mark. So you can choose to write that step, or you can choose not to. Yes, no, you can actually choose. But I think I'm going to simplify my step. I always like to deal with simpler things, you know? So here we have a positive 3, and then we have plus or minus the square root of what? When I go to my calculator and say negative 3 squared minus 4 into 4 into negative 6, and I simply get 105. Then I say, well, this entire thing is divided by 8. Then now it's time for me to separate my solutions. I have 3 plus the square root of 105, which is divided by 8. Or I say x equals 3 minus the square root of 105. And of course, everything is divided by 8. So now, when I go to my calculator and try to solve for x for the first case, well, I simply get 1.66. So I'll say, therefore, x equals positive 1.66 to 2 decimal places. Then I go again and find the second solution. So for that one, I say minus, and I find that my second value of x will just be negative 0.91 to 2 decimal places, of course. So once again, if it is 4 marks, you may get a mark for writing this in standard form, substituting into the correct formula, and stating the two values of x. But if it's 3 marks, you won't get a mark for that. But certainly, you'll get a mark for substitution as well as the values of x. So, well, let's look at the last one for this lesson. Now here they say, please solve for x in this case. You have x into 3x plus 1, and this entire thing is set equal to 5. So, well, the first thing we need to do here is to write this equation in standard form. And how do I do that? Well, we simply distribute the x, and then we come back again and we take this 5 to the left-hand side, all right? Now, x by 3x, we get 3x squared. X by 1, it's a solid x. When the 5 arrives on the left, it actually becomes negative, and this entire thing is set equal to 1. Now you have a mark which is stored in a cool, dry place and kept out of reach of children. Then now it's time for you to state the quadratic formula. You say, well, x equals negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac, and this is divided by 2a. I'm not really sure if I'm the only one who actually observed this, but the more the formula you memorize, the more you put formula into your head, the wiser you become, or at least the smarter you become. I think putting formula into your head adds a little bit of intelligence. I'm not sure, but I really think so. Now the question is, what is the value of b? Well, the coefficient of x is 1, so it means the value of b will just be 1. So here we have 1 squared minus 4a, a is 3, and c is simply negative 5. Then, of course, everything is divided by 2a, where a is a beautiful 3. Then it's time for us to simplify this equation. So I'm simply going to go to my calculator and say 1 squared minus 4 into 3 into negative 5. Well, I simply get a solid 61. And dividing everything by 6, then now I can go ahead and separate my solutions. So I have negative 1 plus the square root of 61 divided by 6, or my x will just be negative 1 minus the square root of 61. And of course, this entire thing is divided by 6. Then simplifying this, or rather finding the exact values of x, well, for the first one, I find that x will just be positive 1.14, or x will just be negative 1.47. Yes. Well, it's 47, that's true. And then for this one, it's, yes, 14, right. So these are the two solutions in this case. And of course, once again, we know that if you got a mark for substitution, in fact, for writing this in standard form, there's going to be a mark for this substitution, and there's going to be a mark for those, for the values of x as well. So yes, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope it helps a lot, and that after successfully watching this video, you are now able to use the quadratic formula.